Awesome, Kaushik. Thanks a lot for taking the time to do this session. When as we discussed briefly, this is a topic that is quite interesting. I think the audience also loves it, and it is something that we've covered before in some shape, or forms, but never
Correct.
really from the perspective of a technology or engineering leader or a CTO. So excited to dive into it. Maybe just as a broad signpost for the things we cover, then we want to understand how you think about this whole role of organization and culture, which people always talk about this more in say operations or other functions, but what role does it play in technology? How has it evolved, right, in the different companies of different types that you have worked, built, etc. A
Yeah.
little bit of the meat and potatoes of how you think about team building, management, hiring, especially in what has become a competitive environment in many ways for like
Hmm.
high quality engineering talent. And then a little
Yeah.
bit about understanding what, if any, role AI is playing in the way your technology organizations are operating today. But to
Correct.
kick things off, would love to know a little bit more about what your career has been like. You've had a long career across so many different companies, including some of India's most important startups. And would love to understand what some of your roles were, what were the transitions you experienced, and some broader perspective on how it contributed to your journey as a technology leader. So I think we'll ground it
Sure.
in that, and then we'll take off with the three sections that I briefly mentioned.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Firstly, thanks, Rohit, for the invite. I think even personally, it helps to sort of reflect. Basis what of some of these questions that you're asking. I think it does help me, sort of go down memory lane a little bit. And hopefully, through this conversation, it also adds value to the community. So, thanks for firstly for this. I've sort of briefly listened to some of the previous, conversations as well. Some of the folks I know very intimately, so relate to a lot of those topics. So great initiative. So just want to call that out.
Thank you.
Uh, I've been, like you said, yeah, I have been I've been part of fairly, I would say, fairly successful organizations in the past. And I'm sort of lucky to have had the opportunity to, be a part of, these organizations. But before I sort of uh, you know, talk to you about my, career, take a little bit of a step back into, how it all became, right? In terms of where I'm at. See, my first curiosity with computers happened when we got a Super Mario at home, and then Pokemon happened, a bunch of other things. Right, I'm talking 90s, and then got an opportunity to choose between biology and computers, and I was extremely curious about computers, and I think that my parents were supportive to because even in those days, computers were still relatively very new and wasn't exactly established as a field where people could sort of really think about. Of course, there was a lot of interest growing at that
Yep,
point in
yep.
time, at least in India. So got the opportunity to choose, and I chose computers. First brush with basic floppy disks and storing programs in floppy disks, which would get full very easily. Um, from there on, so till that time, it was more of me being attracted to this proposition of things inside a box, and how you could sort of literally make it do things basis commands that you were passing. But my first aha moment was when we had this microprocessor 8085 assembly level language lab in my first year of computer science engineering, where and the code was extremely raw in terms of we having to move registries
Right.
literally. And our prof taught us about interrupts, and through an interrupt I was able to actually turn on a fan, right? So the realization at that point in time was you could actually use software to make an impact on the physical world in some sense, right?
Right.
And could
Right.
sort of experience it firsthand. And that sort of was a bit of a it was an insight, so to speak, to me, right? Personally, from there on, obviously, when I did my internship in Calcutta in this company called as Webel, which used to get tenders for various government and subdivisional office work for Calcutta. And there I built my first information kiosk, right? Touch screens, computer graphics at the back, at the back, figuring out which pixel somebody's tapping on, and information is sort of come out. This is a bunch of repositories that we had the backend, right? And you know then I realized that okay, it's not just keyboards. You could also sort of pass commands through various kinds of touch interfaces, right? I'm talking an era even before the mobile phones really came into our hands, right? And uh, from there on, I came to Bangalore. I worked for this product called as e-Coffee Connect. It's called ECA today. It's a commodity integrator. It helps you integrate, various kinds of commodities like coffee, sugar, etc. to buyers. Buyers could be Nestle and such, right? And
Right.
uh, so there were these suppliers in Vietnam and Brazil, and and then there could be a buyer in Europe like Nestle, sort of buying coffee, hedging their bets, etc. And that really helped me land a little bit around the power uh, of how communication could happen over the internet, right?
Right.
And my first introduction to a programming language like Java. I mean, of course, we learned C, C++ in college. Now, uh, C++ obviously brings in notions of object-oriented programming, and then in those days there were these two lines of thought around C++ versus Java. Java came with its own virtual machine. So this construct of sort of write in one place, deploy wherever there's a JVM available, right? And so that was my first introduction, and sort of real and the pace at which things were moving, at least in those days, was pretty rapid, and I don't think much has changed, right? Even today, I think we live in an era where I personally feel that I'm super lucky to sort of be in an era where there's so much happening, right?
Right. Right.
From the time
Absolutely.
that we had these huge handsets which were as heavy as a brick to today, wearable devices we could actually pass commands through voice, right? And that's the kind of journey that at least I've been lucky to be a part of, and at that point in time, really sort of understood what it means when you are able to actually trade over the computer. You could hedge like a buyer could hedge their risks in terms of a particular crop, and significant amount of dollars being transferred, right? In terms of contracts being made. So really, I think a lot of exposure towards very raw problems that it sort of got an opportunity to solve for server side programming, etc. From there on, work majorly into the retail space, largely around sort of figuring out insights. So today we have all of these fancy databases that allow you to churn petabytes of data and give you near real-time insights. In those days we used to create binary files, right?
Right.
And those
Okay.
and this and this binary files could sort of bring various kinds of segmentations and cross segmentations, and they would run for 8 to 10 hours. And God forbid if it failed in between, we'll have to run it again, right? But even then, it was generating insights. So we were doing loyalty analytics for retail companies like Giant Carlisle and Stop and Shop, etc. And they were ready to pay whatever sums, because we were able to figure out buyer behavior, basket distribution basis, which we could actually get all of those insights, right? And we thought we were pretty cool doing what we were doing in those days, generating insights. maybe it came after a week because it really took
Right.
time to sort of run and then generate insights, etc. But um, that was my first brush with information retrieval, so to speak. Then got an opportunity to work on Winamp, which was in those days one of the most popular media players on the Windows machines. And then through Winamp, you could have broadcasting tools from where you could actually broadcast your playlists over the internet. Think
Right.
Napster over the web, right? And if you could do that, you could actually get people to tune into your station. We used to call them radio stations, and I was sort of managing Shoutcast at that point in time. And essentially anybody could end up becoming popular in some sense. Like, this guy is a DJ, right? He plays this genre of songs,
Right.
and
Right.
and anyone across the world could tune in to your stations, right? um, that exposed me to the power of the internet, where you could sort of connect people and you could actually send across various kinds of messaging, right? Across the board. So those were my formative years, honestly, towards what one could do vis-a-vis computers. At some point in time, and I've been lucky to have had great mentors in the past who sort of put in a lot of trust in me, given me opportunities to solve very hard problems. Amod being one, he was the CTO at that point in time at Flipkart. Got an opportunity to, and in those days I was at Yahoo, and sort of had a conversation. Really liked talking to him and the team at Flipkart. And then that was my first step into the startup. Before that, it was more traditional in terms of, the corporate sort of things that I've sort of worked in. But that was my first exposure to a startup, so to speak, right? Um, Worked on some pretty cool stuff, I would say. One was towards figuring out intent given a search query. Now,
Mhm.
in those days, we were sort of dabbling with this concept of semantic search. We were a four-member team, but it was, I would imagine, a pretty hard problem to solve for, at least in terms of, especially given the size of the catalog that Flipkart had, and it was not very structured, right? The catalog, I mean, Flipkart was growing organically. It wasn't as if there was too much of a structured thought given in terms of how the catalog would grow. And then and at that point in time, sort of build the first with the team, and really a bunch of rock stars. Not we're talking four engineers, right? At that point in time in the search team, absolute rock stars. And today, people won't sort of, they find it hard to believe that it was such a small team sort of
Right.
build
Right.
that. But we built the first notion of intent. For example, if somebody was typing red shoes, you would rather show shoes that were red in color versus red tape shoes, right? So the first
Right.
construct on figuring out intent. And it was almost magical because that that index was actually almost talking to you in some sort of, or at least understanding what you were sort of trying to build. And from there on, we also before Big Billion Days, of the first sale that Flipkart did was called, as if I recall, Diwali Dhamaka or some such,
Right.
and major hit. So we built the first promotions platform. We called it Santa, and that became quite popular inside Flipkart. Obviously we used that for the Big Billion Days. I would say a lot of learnings from the first Big Billion Days. Pretty much, I mean, Murphy's law kicked in during the Big Billion Days. And anything that could go wrong went wrong, right? I would say. But again, significant amount of learnings. Worked at Ola. At Ola, built this category called as Ola Share. Again, there's a routing problem in India specifically. How do you figure out U-turns? I mean, when somebody is taking a share cab, they are essentially they value, for example, money more than time. I'm just making a very loose comment here, but you get the drift. But then they will draw a line saying, not more than X amount of extra time, right?
Right.
But suddenly roads can become one ways, right? In the context of, I mean, suddenly you can end up figuring out that, okay, this U-turn that existed doesn't exist anymore,
Right,
right?
right, right,
Now, how do you be on top of these things? Obviously, you're getting some amount of information that could come from, Google Maps, but you had to create your own routing algorithms and autocorrect to the extent that you could. And traffic is one of the hardest problems, for example, to predict, right? So, how do you then autocorrect and scale that proposition? We're talking, maybe 100,000 requests coming across the stack in a minute's time when at peak hours, right? And that many permutation combination in terms of the number of routes that can be
right,
generated, right?
right.
So that was, an exposure, and we didn't really have too much to fall back upon in terms of on the internet, in terms of, what would be the best routing algorithm. I mean, of course, Google will throw you a bunch of results, but they will not work in the context of our roads, and every city, every nook is different, right? So then you have to
Mhm,
figure that
mhm.
out, right? So a lot of first principle thinking in terms of how do you sort of build a search algorithm. I'm just recalling some of the highlights, if you may, right, off the top of my head. And um, yeah, that's been a bit of a journey in terms of first being exposed to the uh, different things that a computer could do, and then
Mhm.
sort of then understanding how the stack
Right.
is sort of built, right? And I think if there's one common trait, I would say, when I sort of look back into, some of these opportunities that I've been lucky to have, if there's something that I would attribute to myself from a common trait, would be curiosity, right? I mean, that
Uh-huh,
is
uh-huh.
something which
Sure,
I
sure.
which I feel has sort of opened up some of these doors for me.
I
I've
understand.
always been attracted to hard problems, primarily, I would say, right?
And
Yeah.
to that effect, one additional question that I also wanted to ask. At Flipkart, at Ola, and elsewhere, I think the problems that you discussed, you were solving some like hard problems, right? Like there was math behind
Hmm.
it. There was a lot of thinking, architecting. Apart from
Yeah.
writing the code, right? Right. Writing the code was probably the easiest part of all of the different things that you had to do to make the routing algorithms or the billion day sale or the semantic search aspects, etc. work.
Hmm.
Did you ever
Hmm.
consider between becoming an IC versus becoming a technology leader? Right? Like today,
Hmm.
someone can look at your career track and say, hey, you've always been rising up the technology
Hmm.
ladder, more teams, more responsibility. Today, you're running the entire technology organization for what is a top startup here in the country. But just was also
Hmm.
curious to know how you made that choice between going
Hmm.
down the management and the leadership route, apart from the problem
Hmm.
solving, versus say
Hmm.
just focusing on an independent contributor role, which is, I suppose, a lot more common of late. Not sure,
Hmm.
I'm not as sure how it was back in the day, but that was just one
Hmm.
small question I also thought I'd get your perspective on.
Fair, fair. I think intrinsically, uh, I get drawn to solving for problems. So, before Super Money, one of the roles that I sort of played was that of a CEO at a SaaS company, right?
Right.
And when I was sort of deliberating what to do, what kind of company if I were to start, I naturally sort of went towards solving for a problem that I get excited about, which is more around technology and engineering, right? I mean, I could have thought about solving something, for example, on the B2C space, right?
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
So if I were to reflect back on that, I think personally it's the surface area that attracts me. I like to solve
Mhm, mhm,
fairly large problems,
mhm, mhm, mhm.
uh, versus, let's say, going deep into one particular
I
area. I
understand.
would, loosely speaking, right? And so there'll be a pivot on technology which I get naturally attracted to. and there I would want to solve a fairly large problem,
I
right?
understand.
i think I think that's how I would sort of peg myself. uh, but if I were to reflect back, although being a manager for a fairly long amount of time, I think that I derive the most satisfaction out of solving a particular problem, right?
I understand.
So yeah, so that would be one of the things. Yeah.
No, no, makes a lot of sense. And I would imagine that in many cases, large problems, or more than large, also like varied problems, as you sort of
Hmm.
mentioned, often the large surfaces associated with them sometimes
Yeah.
come from organizations where you then have a lot of other folks who are also working in bits and parts to try and solve those problems. And then maybe
Yeah.
in some ways, wanting to be on top of it all, to be able to solve all of it, then naturally comes with the responsibility or the accountability of then also taking the team with you, and so on
Yeah.
and so forth. Right? So I can understand how your preferences for the kind of things you wanted to do led you in that direction. Jumping
Hmm.
jumping in maybe to the first segment, understanding a little bit about what role this whole concept of culture, right, and organization building plays in a technology function. I think one, if
Hmm.
you could give me a little bit of a sense of how relevant is it, how important it is, how do you think about the role of culture in your engineering org, and second,
Hmm.
how does this vary as a company scale, right? At Flipkart, you were a team of 4 people. At Udar,
Hmm.
I imagine it was a team of dozens of people, if not more. Probably something of
Hmm.
similar scale here at Supermoney. And then, of
Hmm.
course, you worked in the large American companies as well, which would have had hundreds
Hmm.
of people in their global organizations, just
Hmm.
in technology alone. So,
Hmm.
if you could give me a little bit of a sense, why is culture important? What role does it play? And how does it change
Sure.
as teams
Sure.
become smaller, larger,
Sure.
etc.?
Sure. Sure. I think. Hmm. I think, see, when it comes to culture, I don't necessarily demarcate between, let's say, an engineering and maybe an operations and maybe a business team, right? I think that, and of course, there are stages of organizations, right?
Of course.
You will end up having an early stage company where a lot of the culture is a function of people setting the direction.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
It's them who are setting a lot of where the organization needs to go and how they need to go there. As organizations become larger, by then you already have a lot of the culture being reinstated, and it being a lot more rigid, so to speak, and harder to sort of evolve. Like, for example, if you were to think of an organization like I don't know, not taking names. Let's say one of these organizations that went bust, right? A phone company that went bust because iPhone came and ate its lunch, right?
Right, right.
They found it very very hard to change who they were, because a lot of things do get set in stone, right? So navigating or sort of turning that around can be very hard, right? That said, I think to answer your first question, I think I think culture is a bit of a continuum in the sense
Mhm,
that
mhm.
there is something base that uh, people who are giving directions, at least initially, set in a startup, and then there are going to be nuances that might be there in each of the functions, right? um, but more importantly, in my mind, it's not so much about what is written on the walls
Mhm,
or
mhm.
what gets shared over emails or what gets talked about in meeting rooms, but it's really what you're doing every day in your organization that defines your culture, right? And I think that it is important to recognize that, and sometimes that introspection can be hard because you are sort of getting signals and you're getting noise, right? How do you sort of then determine that maybe this is what I said my culture was, and this is where I am, and
Mhm,
this
mhm.
is where the deviation might be, and it could be a smallish deviation or a largest, or a very large deviation, right? Uh, Usually, if it's a very large deviation, it's very hard to land. But if it's a smallish deviation, maybe there could be some amount of correction, either in terms of what you state you want to be, or you change the things that you're doing. It could be one of them, right?
Right.
Um, that said, as a startup specifically, as it sort of keeps evolving, um, certain things that you thought worked for you, in terms of what you exhibited as a culture, may or may not hold true, and hence it is important to also evolve, right?
Right.
So,
Right.
so what you did, let's say, for example, you followed the dictum of, move fast and break things, and that worked. But then, over time, you ended up becoming a successful organization, and if you broke things, a lot of people got pissed off with you,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
then you have to change a little bit of what you are doing, right? Um, and especially in technology, I think as technologists, we love to solve problems. We love to validate some of our hypotheses that can be there at the back of our head. Just put it out there and see if it works or not. But then I think it is important for an engineering organization to be very, very aware of uh, the trade-offs, right? Some of the best engineers that I have worked with have a very clear view, in terms of specifically calling out um, some of the trade-offs that they are taking and saying, "Hey, look, I'm taking this debt now. I'm just making you aware that this is a debt which can come back and sort of cause problems later on. So we
Mhm,
best
mhm, mhm.
sort of get rid of it at some point in time. Debt is not bad. I don't. When it sort of has gathered a bit of a negative connotation, I don't necessarily think that debt is bad, right? But as long as you're conscious about it,
Right.
as long as you're thinking first principles, I think it's good, right? So yeah, I mean, again, going back to your question, an organization can have a culture where they say they take pride in their velocity.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
now that's an overall view. Now that is a continuum that can end up flowing into technology as well.
Hmm.
That
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
technology org also takes pride in its velocity.
Right. You
Okay,
ship fast, you build products fast, and so on
correct,
and so forth.
correct. However, as a technologist, you are over time you're also aware about the fact that if you don't do things properly, it will
Right.
come back and really bite you, right? So naturally, engineers would want to be risk averse. They would want to be risk averse, right? So naturally, there is that friction that will come into play when you're sort of part of an engineering org, because and especially when it comes to software engineering, it's fraught with uncertainties. If
Right.
somebody says I have been able to estimate things 100% accurately, that man has my lady has my respect, right? I've really come across such person. But if you're there, I'm we're interviewing, by the way. But anyways, I think so there is that bit of risk awareness, but again, that organization needs to have a slant towards velocity. But a good organization not only has that slant, but they also end up building the right checks and balances such that they are not releasing things that are not high quality, right?
I
So
understand.
so when somebody asks me for, let's say, hey, velocity versus quality, I say both, right? It cannot be one or the other, right? So 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 at a startup, maybe that is what it is. But maybe at a larger company where there's way too much at stake. If things break, maybe the culture then shifts to being safe, be safe first, right?
I understand.
And that safe is not just quality, it could be security, it could be, compliance, whatever, right? And so different stages of organizations, but I would imagine the core tenet of a culture to be a continuum, and then nuances can exist
Sure.
in different functions,
Sure, sure.
right?
No, I think that's super helpful. One of the things that also just came to my mind is when we also keep seeing different, companies take different approaches as startups, especially at the early
Uh,
stage, which is where I'm working now.
uh,
There is often this difference in perspective that when it comes to velocity, right? Like both teams want to build something high quality, but there is a difference in perspective in terms of velocity, which comes not from being able to say doing more in less time, but in terms of what
hmm,
is it that you choose to do first, right? Like the
hmm,
MVP for the product, does it have one or two of the top functionalities that you promised your customer? Or is it a full stack
hmm,
platform that has everything in it on day one, right?
hmm,
Which can then be the difference between going live and shipping the first POC in weeks versus
hmm,
months, right? I think that becomes like one choice that I've seen founders consciously
hmm,
make. Of course, in
hmm,
certain spaces, say if you're building in healthcare, you're building in financial services, you
hmm,
maybe can't take that first path, right? Maybe it has to always be a fully digested product because there are regulatory requirements around compliance, safety,
yeah,
money laundering, privacy, whatever it may be, right?
yeah,
To
yeah,
ensure that these things happen. But I was just reflecting on that as you were talking about the velocity and the quality aspect.
yeah,
This is also
yeah.
another way in which I've seen people go about
So,
it. Quite
so
interesting.
one of the things, so Rohit, one of the things is, especially if you, yeah, so the domain brings in another angle, right?
Right.
But it, I think what is useful, like even in the context of fintech, right? Being compliant, following the laws of the land are non-negotiable, right? When I'm talking in the context of super money, right? I think somehow you inherit the domain, and by that what I
Right.
mean is, by design, you are not consciously thinking about it all the time. Meaning, if you divert from, let's say, the guardrails that have been built for you, you will not be able to ship, right?
Right.
now
Right. Right.
now you create those guardrails, and then you try to figure out the right kind of velocity, cross quality, etc., such that there is predictability as far as your organization is
Of
concerned,
course.
and
Of course.
homogeneity in behavior, right?
I think that makes a lot of sense that constraints in some way also influence how the culture
Yeah,
in the organization can operate because the culture
yeah,
is to allow you to navigate those constraints while still being
correct.
effective. I think
Correct.
that's super
And
helpful.
and as a startup, you still push the bar, right? You
Of
still
course.
want to understand, you push the envelope and see how much more, right? But the fabric has to be solid in the sense
Yes,
that it can't be a loose fabric that a little push and it sort of gives in, right? So
I
I
understand.
think it's important to,
Perfect. I think given that that grounding context, would love to jump into a little bit of the meat and potatoes of this session, which is, what do you do on the day to day? How do you run a tech organization? I've always been fascinated to understand how this happens, right? I keep hearing my friends talking about Jira tickets and Scrum Masters, and it sounds like completely alien speak to someone who's never worked in the software or the engine or the technology space like that. So maybe we start off right at the beginning. How do you approach this whole aspect? Like, you've built teams, you've inherited them, you've done both over a period of time now. So how do you approach this whole construct of a team, right? Like when you
hmm,
think of a tech org and its building blocks, right? What
hmm,
does
hmm,
that org design look like? And also when
hmm,
you're
hmm,
adding people, when you're adding roles, when you're creating capabilities or functions, how do you
hmm,
link
hmm,
that back to the core objective of the business, the constraints within which you have to operate, as you just mentioned? I think that would be a
hmm,
great grounding before we get into some of the
hmm,
specific aspects of how do you do hiring, how do you think about feedback and recognition, and so on and so forth.
hmm,
But maybe just to start with
hmm.
that, like what's the
Yeah,
org chart? How does it come together?
sure,
Tell me a little bit
sure,
about it.
sure. Sure, sure. By the way, on Jira, there are, it's a very polarizing word. There are fans and the absolute detractors. Just want to put it out there. And if you ask me which club I belong to, I'm not going to answer that. Okay, so coming to the tech outside of things, I think see there are certain any organization who see if you are doing a 0 to 1, assume that you're a 4 5 member team. I think that putting in too much structure is detrimental. I
Hmm.
think there is anyway significant amount of ownership. I think people in a 3 4 member team also will figure out uh, who takes what sort of a ownership or depth, right? I mean, even if, for example, 3 founders come together and the 3 friends come together, build a company, there will be a natural selection that happens in terms of who does what, right? Same thing is true for engineering teams. There will be people who might be generalists. There could be people who are sort of specialists in front end, back end. Maybe there are people who understand the network side of things better than others. So there will be that kind of natural selection in terms of specialty, etc. But if I were to take, for example, Super Money, okay, Super Money as a platform today, all the way. So we are currently a 120 member team in engineering. And while we are the top 5 UPI app today, we have been doing UPI for only 1.5 years now, not more than that.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And I think a couple of days back we touched, I think, 10 million transactions a day, which was pretty phenomenal, I would
Yep.
say.
Yep. Yep.
Uh, but the fact of the matter is, we are competing in a very crowded space. Meaning, there is a phone pay, there's a Google Pay, there's a bunch of others, uh, Paytm, and these organizations are fairly mature from a technology standpoint. They would have learned from the mistakes, and they have built a sort of their technology has evolved over time. But from a end customer standpoint, they don't care. They don't care if you are just a new kid on the block. It's not as if you are allowed to fail as a result of that, right? So if so it's important to understand the domain, your competition, who. So even, for example, when I was doing my own SaaS company, there was a product called as Percept Insight, which is even today, I think, they're sort of they continue to operate fairly successfully, was a replacement for Mixpanel and MoEngage put together, meaning it would
Okay.
do end-to-end analytics as well as do engagement. We saw that as a white space, and we sort of built it. Now, if you go to customers and say, "Hey, here's a replacement for, let's say, for example, Mixpanel," they are not going to give you any slack saying, "Oh, you guys are new," unless they are, of course, there are well wishers, and I've been lucky to have people who have given me that opportunity to make mistakes, even in the
Right.
context of Percept Insight. uh, they generally people who are paying you money are not going to sort of say it's fine
Of
if
course.
things
Of course.
break, right? So it's very important to firstly understand your domain. Where are you sort of competing in? And your tech organization should reflect that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, one of so as you might have realized, we are competing against some of the best in the industry when it comes to UPI. So our technology cannot be also ran. It has to be absolutely top notch, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
so so our structure has to reflect that. Now, what our structure also has to reflect is the fact that given that we are relatively a late entrant in the market, we probably have to build a better product than
Of
what's there in
course.
the market,
Of course.
right?
Of course.
Otherwise, why will people give you an opportunity?
Sure, sure. Makes a lot
And
of
we have
sense.
to and we have to iterate fast, because we'll sort of put things out there, because it's impossible to know everything, right? A lot of times you end up building features and you get surprised that you thought the customers will use it a certain way, but they use it very, very differently, right? So you have to put it out there, and then you figure out, and then you have to course correct. So in the context of super money, the structure has to ensure that not only are you building things in a manner that uh, are competing against some of the best in the industry, be it in terms of resiliency, be it in terms of performance, be it in terms of latency, but you also have to enable your business to iterate and fail fast, right?
Right, right.
And your structure has to reflect that, right? Now, that could be a different answer when you're sort of, let's say, going after a completely green field and you're experimenting with, let's say, no competition, right?
Mhm,
and
mhm,
and
mhm.
and 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 of course you're building a very, very good product, but you don't really know how things will pan out, right? So in those cases where you're absolutely 0 to 1, where you're a 3-4 member team, I would rather you allow the structure to evolve. Initially, I think it helps to keep it fluid. You have a set of principles. It's important to have strong principles, but it's also important to be flexible about when to change them, or when to sort of let those emerge over time, right? So horses for courses in some sense, right? I
Yes,
think,
yes,
and
yes.
and that is how it should sort of pan out. Not
And,
sure if
and,
I
and to
answered
that
your question, but
and to
yeah,
that effect, then if you take any of these examples that you mentioned, right, either what you were building yourself at your previous venture, or any of the roles
yeah,
that you've done, right, where
yeah,
either you were a category creator like Flipkart, right, or you're operating in a competitive space against incumbents like in Super Money, and so
yeah,
on and so forth. Could you also give us a sense of understanding now that, look, this is where it's coming from, and this is the
mm,
concept or the principle that has to be adhered to, because these are your
mm,
market imposed constraints. I'm coming back to the
mm,
constraints concept because it's a very useful way to remember this,
yeah,
discuss the remaining things that we're talking about.
mm,
What did that look like in terms of org design? Like, what does that affect? Does it affect, say, the roles that you want to hire for, the functions that you want to
mm,
create, the seniority and skill level of people that you want to get? Like, in some places, okay, I need to have the best, I need to already have somebody with 20 years experience as an architect in XYZ technology on day one in my team as a founding engineer, versus saying,
mm,
hey, you know what? We can start off with younger generalists and we can figure it out over time. Right? I'm just trying to get
yeah,
a sense of, on the
yeah,
practical
yeah,
terms,
yeah,
what does that look like from a design
yeah, yeah,
and an org building perspective?
yeah, yeah, sure. Before I answer that question, I'll give you an example of my one of my stints at Ola. So I was sort of heading Ola Play, and lots of conversations at the leadership level in terms of, and Ola was doing something with Ola Play that nobody had done before. Meaning, they had put a device at the back of the car, and it was getting controlled through a DXC, which is a driver device, right? And the idea really was to personalize that entire experience, and that really struck a chord with our customers, especially people who were going to the airport in the context of Bangalore. Of course, in different cities, different use cases, but a lot of when that was getting built, right? A lot of questions on, why are you guys building this? What's the point? You just have some, preload some movies, let it be. Why are you sort of, when somebody books, you're sort of trying to personalize it, etc., etc., right? And I think Bhavesh made a good point at that point in time. And a lot of times, the customer doesn't know what they want,
Sure, sure,
right?
sure.
They don't know. I mean, if they've not seen a, if they've not seen a chat GPT in the past, they don't know what a chat GPT is, for example, right? And when you sort of, if you have very high conviction, right? The reason I'm giving that example, by the way, is because sometimes you the constraints are not necessarily being imposed by the environment on you,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
You have a perception of how things should pan out, and you have a very strong point of view on it, right? This is how things have to pan out, right? Now, In that context, it is quite possible that you try to solve for a problem that requires a specialist. Let me give another example. When we were building Ola Play, at that point in time, there were conversations around the fact that there could be connection drops
Right.
when
Right.
somebody sort of going up. How do you make sure that it's seamless? So one of the thought process was, can we create a car network where every passenger who's on a Ola Play could share their network with some other vehicle, and the communication would happen at a particular layer of the network. Okay. Now this problem statement demanded somebody who has a deep understanding of networking. It
Hmm.
could not be end up. It could not be something that could have ended up being solved by a regular person, sort of just making an entry into, let's say, computer science, saying,
Right.
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 Now the beauty lies hence in trying and peeling the onion to the extent that you can
Mm-hmm.
towards
Mm-hmm.
translating what might look like a blob of an idea to something more concrete, right? Uh, the example of human slide, you already know that you have, what you don't know is the troubles these guys went through. That you
Right.
figure out when you're
Right.
sort of
Right.
scaling and you're sort of clocking 10 million, 10 million. There's a transactions, and you have all of these different kinds of network speed, jitter, etc. You'll figure that out over time, but you broadly know. But the challenge in my mind comes in terms of org structure when you have an idea, and it's hard, but
Mm-hmm.
you haven't really spent enough time figuring out the nuts and bolts of it. So if you do figure out the nuts and bolts of it, then you can do a lot more justice towards the right kind of people that you're hiring.
Right.
Do you need an infrastructure layer, for example? Do you need a network layer in my previous example, right? Do you need a team that do you need a lab, for example, where you are trying some of these things out? Where in the order of priority is this?
Right.
Is
Right.
this something that we would end up doing once we let's say get some sort of a PMF, right? I think I think those conversations are important, and that should direct the structure of the organization, right?
I
I was
understand.
like I was saying, the search team was a 4 member team. At some point in time, it evolved into a 120 member odd engineering team, right? With auto suggest being a different team, with intent being a different team, ranking, and the entire index, right? So it evolves, right, over time, and you end up having you sort of either have clarity on day zero, or where you want to go and plan accordingly, right?
And
But
tell me
the
something. So one additional thing that I just want to understand here is, at least in, so I worked in operations. I've also worked on the commercial side in some of my previous roles before VC, and I always
hmm,
remember there that getting headcounts, which
hmm,
is whether I wanted an additional technician on the shop floor, or I wanted an additional sales manager and pharma rep in the
hmm,
market, was
hmm,
very much dictated by the budget that finance would allocate me for these headcounts. Right, there was
hmm,
always a pressure to maintain the people cost because it was such a big contributor to the overall margin profile of whatever we were doing.
100%,
Right. I want to
100%.
understand if the same logic, right? Like you said, like this particular capability such as auto suggest has now become enough of a feature or enough of a criticality that it links
Hmm,
to revenue in a certain way that I can
hmm,
dedicate three people to it, right? Whereas
hmm,
previously four of us were doing everything within search for a say a
hmm,
period of time, right? So just
hmm,
also quickly understand, does the same logic from
hmm,
a head counting perspective, from a budgeting perspective, also apply in the technology organizations you worked at, and that these
hmm,
roles, these functions, they have to sort of earn their ROI to being able to allocate more resources and more people? Or
hmm,
is it
hmm,
a little bit more amorphous that the tech org as a
hmm,
whole is what is looked at? And
hmm.
it's not really that detailed. Okay, you can have three people for this, four people for that, five people for that. You can have 100 people over. Overall, you decide now how you want to allocate them. Just curious to get an input from
See,
you.
sure. See, yeah. See, this is not a 0-1 answer, and I'll
Hmm.
tell you why. And
Hmm.
I mean no, I'm sort of not being classist in any way, sort of making this comment. around the fact that when it comes to software engineering specifically, and some of those nuances also exist when it comes to some of the other areas of computer science, but in software there are tangibles and there are certain intangibles.
Intangibles. Sure.
Okay. There are going to be, and there could be problems that you're solving for which are very, very pointed. There could be point problems that I want to build a website in today's world, right? In today's world, it sounds like a bit of a point problem. Okay. Now, when I'm trying to build a website, I could end up building a website that does what I wanted it to do, and end of story. Or I could end up building a platform capability
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that allows me to create as many different kinds of websites as I want.
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay.
Hmm.
So the platform capability is a bit of an intangible.
Right.
Now leaders with foresight would look at what they have at their hand uh, with the right kind of understanding. When I'm saying at their hand, I don't necessarily mean the software, I mean the people.
Hmm.
Ultimately, because it's the people who build the
Of
software.
course.
Uh, Towards how are they looking at it? Are they really looking at it as a bit of a, is it just a cost equation that you end up going from point A to point B, build a website? Or are we looking at a capability that can end up churning as many websites as you want, right? Uh, um, and hence, the answer is slightly nebulous in the sense that depending, if I oversimplify it, I would say it depends, right? In the sense that it really depends on the kind of organization and how they view technology.
Sure.
I
Sure.
think
Sure.
tech first organizations, uh, there's a term which is used which is enabled. I'm like, what is enabled, man? Everything is technology today, right? At the end of the day, now how, I mean, there could be teams that are helping you automate an Excel sheet, right, to generate some sort of a report. Okay, and that's enough for your business, and anything else is an overkill, and that's your outlook, and I completely respect that, right? But then there could be somebody else who has a different kind of problem, and in that context, how are you viewing technology, right? Are you looking at it as a competitive advantage?
I think that makes sense.
A lot of respect for, in that context, and going back to the search example, we could have continued to do text match, and people could have continued to search for red shoes, and they would have continued to get red tape shoes, and that's okay. They would figure out there's a red shoe somewhere down there, right?
Right.
That's fine.
Right.
But why would we want to invest? Why does it make any sense to invest 110 member team in search, right? So yeah, so that's the answer. I mean, really depends on how you view, your problem statement.
Con-
And this is true specifically in the context of the area that we're sort of discussing at this point, and could be true elsewhere as well. But
Mhm, mhm,
I don't
mhm.
have a very strong point of view on the other areas.
Understood. Understood. And understanding a little bit more about what the management of a tech org looks like, right? So
Hmm.
I'd be very curious to understand what your day in the office typically looks like, right? Do you get to write code at this point of time, or is it mostly meetings? How do you think about like what does that work, right? Like how do you sort of still find the time to build as and when
Hmm.
need to, while also being able to stay in touch with what has now become 100+ people organization, right? People in different parts,
Hmm.
different things,
Hmm.
different leaders within the organization who are managing their own sub teams of 10, 15, 20 people, whatever that might look like.
Hmm.
Give me a little
Hmm.
bit of a sense of what a CTO's a day in the life of a CTO typically looks like
Hmm.
on a normal office day. I'd be super
Hmm.
curious
Hmm.
what that's like.
Hmm. Hmm. I don't have a very uh, there's a flavor of the season, meaning every quarter is different
Mhm.
towards what is an area that you want to focus on. For example, there could be a quarter where we're trying to bring in a lot of talent, so you end up spending a lot of time, your time, sort of talking to the right kind of people both internally and outside in, to see if we can have alignment towards shared goals, right? And that is time consuming, especially if you are trying to not just blindly mass hire, but you're sort of
Mhm, mhm.
trying to bring in people who sort of would make a significant difference, right, to the organization, right? Or sometimes it could be about a particular uh, area that needs deep problem solving, right? It could be in the context of a product that you're building. It could be in the context of, let's say, you having to roll up your sleeves on a specific kind of nebulous problem in technology. It could be in terms of scale, it could be in terms of quality, right? So there are flavors to the season, but almost always dictated by the business needs at that point in time, right? Um, Now, I think that when it comes to that particular aspect, it's largely around problem solving, right? You're basically trying to solve the problem. Now, as somebody in technology, it's very important to speak the language. Now, I personally find, um, you know, I myself going further and further away from writing production grade code. I did that at Raptor. I built some of the uh, Chrome plugins, for Pixel, etc. But it was okay to sort of do those things. We just launching 0 to 1, uh, but I don't think I'm at a stage today where I can write production level code anymore. But that said, I still sort of write code prototypes. I share it with the teams to see if
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
sometimes it's easier to write code and speak that language with engineers
Right,
versus explaining it over a a document or a Slack channel. You just write
sure.
what you want, and they'll take it and say, "Okay, I get what you want, and I'll do a better job of writing that
Right.
code." Right?
And I
So
imagine that the AI prototyping and coding assistants and tools that have come up
yeah,
probably is something, I mean, that it provides a lot of leverage to especially
yeah,
senior folks like yourself to be
yeah,
able to prototype stuff very fast. So
yeah.
I imagine that's super helpful as well.
So it really depends, like I said, on the uh, on the flavor of the season, so to speak. And when it comes to coding, still code, but largely prototypes to communicate what I really want. um, yeah, so that would be what I do. And then there's a habit of looking at certain kinds of metrics when I wake up. Yeah, that would be largely it, right?
Understood.
Metrics and what is the need of the organization in a given month or a quarter, right? That's
Understood.
what takes my
And
attention.
I imagine you would also have to spend time not just say looking at the organization as it is today and
Hmm.
today's problem statements and requirements, etc. But as you were saying, to also have a more of a forward view on
Yeah,
where things will need to evolve, both in terms of tech capabilities, in terms of talent, in terms of like other
yeah,
resources, infrastructure, etc., and to be
yeah,
able to invest and build and prepare those things in advance. So some amount
yeah.
of long-term thinking, I imagine, would be taking up a lot of your work today versus say when you were more focused as a functional leader trying to build just in the here and now. Today you have to think
Yeah,
about the here now and the tomorrow
you
in
have to although what I've noticed is you need to make sure that you continue to have your eye on the ball when it
Mhm.
comes to execution.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
think that oftentimes, and I've been personally guilty sometimes of, spending a little too much time on forward looking,
I see.
and you can see that things can slip through the cracks. Not because the team isn't up to it, but it's really about you translating consistently the ask, right? Sometimes it can be a little premature.
Sure.
So,
Sure.
so I think you need to build that execution rigor. If you're having, let's say, certain kinds of weekly meetings, let's make sure that you're having those meetings, right? And let's make sure that whatever metrics you're discussing are actually tying back to what you're seeing on the ground. I think that helps while you sort of continue to focus on the things that are forward looking, right?
Got
So
it. Understood. Moving to a very important part of this conversation, and especially relevant today in 2025,
yeah.
how do you hire good people? Right? Like you spoke about hiring experts, you spoke about hiring generalists, building the team and having the right talent is clearly an important focus of how you think about
Mm,
running a technology organization. So,
mm,
help me understand a little bit in this day and age, how do you hire these people? How do you get them to work together effectively? And overall,
mm.
like maintain this sort of a high performance culture within the organization. I think that's one of the top questions that the audience members had also requested that we
Got it.
understand, because tech hiring
Got
is
it.
not very obvious. It's also
Mm,
difficult because good people are in demand, like intensely so at this point of time. So just
yeah.
want to get a sense of how you do this and how you go
Yeah.
about
Yeah. I think sure. See, we all live in the knowledge, and we live and we work in the knowledge industry. And what that means is, there's a very high likelihood that there could be a rank fresher who can teach me a thing or two that I don't
it.
know,
Hmm. Hmm.
especially because of the way things continue to evolve. I think the first step is to acknowledge that there could be things which you know that what is the value that this particular individual brings onto your table, right? How does this individual complement your team? Are there things that this individual knows which is complementary to what your team knows today, apart from things that are overlapping? That's very important, in my opinion. I think it's also so essentially what you want to do in interviews is focus a lot on understanding what the person knows
Hmm.
versus what the
Hmm.
person does not know. I think it's
Hmm.
an absolute, you know, waste of people's time if I'm sort of trying to ask a trick question, for example, right? So that to me, I think one should end up focusing a lot on what this person knows and figure out what is the value this person is bringing onto the organization. I think the second aspect is around the fact that is this person great at, let's say, writing code, but are there other areas where this person significantly lacks? Like, for example, do they know why they're doing what they're doing? Is there a
Hmm.
curiosity? Like I was saying, personally, I think I value that extremely. I put a very high value to it. I think curiosity is very important for a person asking why. I think valuing their own time, right? I'm sort of spending so much time doing this. Why am I doing it?
Hmm.
How,
Hmm.
how does that change my world, or how does that change the world outside, right? I think it's important to know, right? I think integrity is super important, in my opinion. I think it's important for people to be honest about, and you could, if you're not honest and in an interview, you only can figure out so much, right? I think you do yourself grave injustice if you're sort of, and I understand people end up trying to put in their best foot when they're coming for an interview, and that's but natural because there's an asymmetry that exists in the interview, anyways, right? The person who's taking the interview, there's a bit of a power asymmetry, if you
Of
may,
course.
right?
Of course.
Uh, but I think it's still important to be honest and give honest answers, because the person on the other end is assuming that you're being honest and evaluating you as such. Right? And the third bit is around resiliency, in the sense that um, um, given a diverse situation, or in a career is not a flat line; it's a sine wave. How has this person actually sort of responded to various kinds of signals. Uh, what has this person learned? When they look back, are they demonstrating enough learnability, for example, right? I think that's important because that's what keeps you uh, alive. Right? So I think these are some of the tenets, very very core tenets, Rohit.
And if you flip this a little bit, right, from the
Uh,
perspective now of not the kind of person that you would like to hire or how you think about hiring and the role that it plays, but if you flip the
mm,
question a little bit in terms of how do you get some of these good people, the top people, to come and work for you, right, to be a part
mm,
of your organization, to contribute to your journey. Because I think
mm,
that asymmetry that you mentioned, while it definitely exists, always existed, it will always exist because one
mm,
party is able to offer a role and the other seeks it. But also in
mm,
many cases, especially when it comes to the senior people, the functional experts, right,
mm,
the more
mm,
niche but specialized capabilities, that asymmetry might be less. It might even get flipped in certain situations, right? On how
yeah, yeah, yeah.
relevant a particular capability is for you. So also I want to get a little bit of a sense of the other side, which is
Yeah.
how do you think about
So again,
why
there,
someone should come and work for you? How do you
yeah, yeah,
communicate
yeah,
that? How do you inspire
yeah,
them?
yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Great question. Again, there, right? These principles that I talked about still hold. As
Hmm.
in,
Hmm.
I will, I am not going to oversell a role to you. That you're not going to. There's absolutely no way that you will end up sticking long, especially if you're a senior person, right? It's your career that is at stake. So it's very important to be honest, to have integrity with which you speak of, what this individual will be doing at the
Hmm. Hmm.
organization. I think it's also important to also state where you want to be in the future, where you were in the past, where you are today, and where you want to be in the future. Right? I think it's important for me at least, right, to be as articulate as I can be about the future, and especially when it comes to senior roles. Why am I hiring a senior person? I mean, unless and until it's a distress hire, I'm hiring this senior person because I have a path, for that particular person to grow, right? And there's enough
Right.
room, right? So I should be able to articulate it very, very clearly to this particular individual. And I think the principles of your organization when it comes to resiliency, your organization when it comes to, let's say, how we view failures, right? I think very important to land that. What is your
Hmm.
tolerance, right? What are the areas that are okay to sort of take risks on? What are the areas that you believe are absolutely sacrosanct that you can't really screw around with? Very important to be extremely open about it, about your
Hmm.
principles.
Hmm.
Let's say that you you I'm just making a loose example that you want people to work from office, okay, but there could be an individual who has worked from home all the time, and let's say that you really really want this particular person to work for you, because if this person comes, you get the next, whatever. But then it's also important for you to state that, hey, this is a principle that I'm not going to breach. I'm just making a random example.
Yeah.
Or it could
Right.
be,
Right.
let's say remote first, saying, I know you love to come to office, but everybody else works remotely. I'm not going to breach that, right, for you. So things that I will, and things that I will not, right? I think it's very important to be very clear about it. Yeah.
Understood.
So, yeah.
Understood. And to this effect of maintaining this high performance culture, right? Like, so this is the baselines, the foundation that you set on top of which
Mm.
everything else is built. These principles, these
Mm.
grounding sort of ideas. Um,
Mm.
what are some of the other things I also want to ask is one, how do you think about like capability and skill building, right? Do technology? I mean, I would imagine technology organizations would be among the ones that would sort of like need to do this the most, right? Because the tools, the languages, the capabilities,
Mm.
they keep expanding more rapidly in software than perhaps anywhere else, right? Like I don't think
Mm.
there was obviously a lot of upskilling that we had to do, say, for technicians in PNG when I was there, but
Hmm.
there's a limitation, right? Like on how much the machines are going to change, accordingly, how much maintenance procedures are going to change, how much tools are going to change, right? But I would
Hmm.
imagine that there's a lot more velocity, just by
Hmm.
virtue of the fact that everything that you're doing is tech, it's digital, it's software from that perspective. So, any
Hmm.
thoughts on how you think about like skilling, about capability building? Is it something that a tech organization should do deliberately, or is it that the people you hire are inherently such that they will find the next best thing, bring it in, prototype it, and then it'll start percolating into the org? Because we do see a lot of your developer tools growing more from a product-led growth approach. Like if I put on my VC hat and I see what founders are pitching, grow from a
Hmm.
PLG perspective rather than Freyo, somebody sold it to the CTO and now the CTO is rolling it out across the org. I mean, we've seen both, but we've seen
Hmm.
PLG being a lot more relevant in software and dev tools than in, say, something like manufacturing, banking, or healthcare, in at least my
Hmm.
limited experience. So I wanted to get a sense
Hmm.
of how new
Hmm.
capabilities
Hmm.
and skills grow in an organization like yours.
Hmm. See, I think in my opinion, the age-old dictum here still holds true, where more deeds, less theory.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, I mean, I have a 12-year old at home. I can keep telling her not to do certain things, but she will do it and then figure out why I said don't do it. Right? I think there is no substitute to doing things on the job and learning. Right? I think especially in startups, your growth is exponential because you are getting exposed to a plethora of different problems firsthand. I think that when it comes to, um, let's say, for example, a larger company where things are a lot more structured, a lot more evolved, L&D team, etc., where you know how much work hours you're putting in and things can be planned, you could, in those cases, fall back a lot on theory because really the guys are not getting that many opportunities to sort of.
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh, Although that said, there's a bit of a caveat. In startups, you can end up doing busy work, meaning you are essentially being loaded with a bunch of things to do. You're not really learning. What
Hmm.
you're doing is you are using, let's say, ChatGPT. It gives you a solution. You don't really know how it came along, and you pasted it, and you problem solved. You moved on. You didn't learn. You didn't end up double clicking on why is the solution the way it is, right? It's very similar in let's say larger organizations where people can go to LLD classes and check their phones, right? So it really depends on the individual to the extent that they're doing justice to the opportunities given to them. But I would imagine that nothing succeeds like sort of doing things firsthand, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And in a startup, you end up getting a plethora of those opportunities. And if you spend a little bit more time trying and understanding why is this particular library built the way it is, right? Why exactly are certain things, let's say, binded? I mean, what exactly? I'm just making this random example. Why uh, when should we choose a round robin algorithm versus, let's say, maybe least recently used an LRU, right? Because both might work at a particular point in time, but something might be more relevant than the other when things scale, right? Depending upon the nature of the application underneath. So, so you could just ask Chat GPT a question saying, "Hey, I want to distribute my traffic evenly," and it might give you an answer saying, "Use, let's say, round robin." But that might not be the best answer for the systems underneath. So maybe the next question could be, "What are the different kinds of algorithms? Which algorithm suits the problem statement at hand?" Right.
Right.
So I think startups offer you that opportunity to
Hmm.
really upskill yourself purely by letting you do things. But it's also up to you to the extent that you want to spend time understanding why you're doing what you're doing.
Understood. Understood. No, that's very interesting. That it's almost that the design of the companies themselves, right? Especially technology organizations, startups, like you mentioned, that there is that the capability building, learning aspect is inherent in many ways,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah,
it's a I mean the enablement is
and
already there in
correct.
many shapes and forms.
Correct. And what you make of it, right? What do you do with it? I think
Right, right.
because anyways you're sitting on top of rapidly evolving technology. Startups are the first to sort of try and see if a new technology can get Of course, you don't want to be. So there's a thin line between being brave and being stupid, right? I
Mm,
mean,
mm,
maybe you
mm.
you don't necessarily want to adapt something which is bleeding edge because nobody else has. I mean, there isn't enough community so to back you up. You don't have enough strength in there, but you just want to take it because it's new and shiny. There's a very high probability you're going to shoot yourself in the foot. So you need to have that balance in terms of adapting new technologies, but startups are a lot more open because it's a lot easier for them to actually accommodate some of these advancements that are happening.
Got it. Got it. My just my last question on the core meat and potatoes topic is an interesting one. It's also something that I valued a lot in the leaders that I reported to work for and saw as the difference between a great boss and someone who was not as enjoyable to work with is the
Hmm.
entire aspect of feedback, right? Which is
Hmm.
sometimes you have to have candid and potentially even uncomfortable conversations with people who report to you.
Hmm.
But you have to get a point across while at the same
Hmm.
time maintain the relationship with the person and the person's relationship with the team and the organization. Right? I've
Hmm.
seen enough and more people just get really, really pissed off by bad feedback, even if the feedback was correct, but say it was given in a
Hmm.
way that offended somebody or it hurt somebody or whatever, right? And people
Hmm.
take these things to heart. So I
Hmm.
want to understand, how do you think about the whole aspect of giving feedback? How would you what are your some of your philosophies that you've seen, both things that you practice and stuff that you've admired in your former managers, bosses as you grew over your career, from this perspective of giving effective feedback?
Hmm. Hmm. Sure. See, now that I think of it, right? I think I personally would not want to be at a place where or do things that I wouldn't sort of do myself. Meaning,
Hmm. Hmm.
if I believe that there is a tonality that can piss me off, I would imagine that to be true for others as well. It may or may not be true, but that's the safest bet that one can take because you assume that you know yourself better than others. Uh, that said, I've made mistakes in the sense that I've misread the room sometimes. I think it's extremely important to raise your hand and acknowledge somebody else's reality. You might be coming
Right.
from a very very different place, but the other person may or may not have sort of uh, consumed or digested the feedback from where you're coming, right?
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
think the first step is to acknowledge the fact that this is this person's reality, and be very very open about the fact that hey, looks like this feedback was not well taken, but this is the premise from where I am coming, right? Is there something that we could do differently going ahead, such that you're not left in the lurch? Because one thing that I will not do is not give feedback. I think it's
Of course.
unfair. I think it's unfair to the person who's working in your team to not be given, not be sort of shown the light, right? If they have blind spots, you're being unfair as a leader, right?
Right.
So I
Right.
think so that is not something that I will shy away from. But can I go wrong with an individual? 100%. And do I go wrong today? I still go wrong today in terms of sort of sometimes figuring out whether this person is actually taking the feedback in the right light or not. And if that happens, I start with saying, hey, look, any feedback, It starts from a place of trust, meaning this is not personal, and this is something which I learned from one of my ex managers who started by doing that. Immediately puts one at ease that okay,
Right.
this is not about the individual; it's really about the situation at hand, right?
And the function and the context.
And the function and the context, right? And I start there, and
So
it's
basically,
not as if
avoid making a value judgment, quote unquote, is
hundred
important.
percent, 100%. And maybe I don't repeat it oftentimes when I'm giving feedback, but when I start with an individual or when I start a relationship, I always state that upfront that the feedback is not about you as an individual, but if it's about that particular situation, right?
Right. Right.
But you can still go wrong, right? And I think if you do, it's important to acknowledge the other person's reality and say, I'm not contesting. This is what transpired. I acknowledge your reality, and if there's something else that we can do to sort of land this better, let me know because feedback you're going to get, right? As
Right,
long as you
right, right,
so,
right. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think it goes a long way in like building trust in the organization and retaining people. I do think that in a lot of places, for example, either people don't have the time or they don't have the need for whatever reason to
mm,
actually be that transparent about things, right? Like you say what you
mm,
wanted to say and you're done. You could care less
mm,
about how somebody took it, where they came from, and changing your perspective and seeing it through their eyes is like far, far away from your considerations. But
yeah,
for me personally, I've never enjoyed that. And I always think the best orgs I worked at, the people who I continue to remain in touch, who are mentors, even 5, 6 years
mm,
later after I stopped working for them, are the
mm,
ones who embodied this concept, right? I think this whole other aspect of what you were alluding to in the beginning, which is don't do something or don't, or maybe you wouldn't ask something or say something or do something that you wouldn't want,
yeah,
to do or to hear or to receive yourself. So a little bit of
yeah,
the of role modeling. I imagine these
yeah,
things are really important, right? I think when I
yeah,
was at PNG, my plant manager used to always tell me, you can't leave a like you can't walk by a piece of paper or some small piece of trash or a packaging material ka wrapper fallen on the floor and
yeah,
not pick it up. Because if you
correct.
don't pick it up, your entire team will think, hey, clearing trash from the floor during operations is not important.
Yeah,
By the end of the week, it becomes a garbage dump. By the end of the month,
yeah,
someone has slipped, fallen, and injured themselves. Right.
yeah,
So that's something that I mean, I've not had the opportunity to manage people in quite some time because I've been doing more individual contributor roles as an investor. But
sure,
back when I did, these were things that were of like paramount importance
100%,
to me.
100%.
And switching gears to just very quickly to the closing part of our conversation, which is a little bit of the flavor of how AI has made a difference in
Hmm,
how you run a
hmm,
technology organization today. So my first
hmm,
question right off of the top is, how are you, or yourself as an organization and even the other technology peer leaders who are your peers in the ecosystem you
hmm,
spend time with, how are you seeing
hmm,
them adopt and leverage AI, right? If you could
hmm,
give me a sense of what are some of the 2 to 3 key roles or key areas of opportunity where you're
hmm,
seeing AI deployment in a technology organization giving very, very high ROI, any tools that you use which you would like to share, right? So
hmm,
that people also get a sense of, okay, what are some of the top technology leaders using themselves today? I think would be a
hmm,
great starting point to
hmm.
to get a flavor of how you use AI as an organization today.
Got it, got it, got it. I think before I answer that question, just set some more context so you know where I'm coming from.
Yes.
I think there is a lot of fluff, honestly, when it comes to AI, Rohit. I think everybody needs to calm down a little bit. It's at the end of the day, software. It's a it's a lot more powerful software than what existed in the past, but it's still a software. Okay,
Hmm. Hmm.
auto regressions existed in the past. Variational auto encoders they existed in the past. GANs existed in the past. Diffusion existed in the past. What changed is transformers, right? Uh, Transformers essentially are they're types of models that allow you to take every token, every word, every pixel, and do parallel processing all at once, right?
Right. Right.
And make sense through a mechanism called a self attestation, right? I think fundamentally that's and it has been enabled by significant advancement in infrastructure, right?
Right. Right.
So these two things have come together and really created something very powerful. But at the end of the day, it's still software. There is no, uh, super thinking, etc. that has come out. Maybe it will at some point. Never say no, but we'll see, right? But we are where we are today, right? Now, given that as a context, especially when it comes to, let's say, having seen huge patterns of data in the past and being able to answer questions, uh, that's the premise in which it really works very well. uh, AI in the context of software engineering today, to answer your question, would be very useful when we are looking at, let's say, boilerplate code, or trying to brainstorm on a particular kind of approach to a given problem, helping in PR reviews, because these things help with velocity,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
or if you have a fairly distributed set of systems, leveraging it towards reducing the mean time to detect the issue as in incident management. Very very useful. Then of course there are other aspects around, let's say, templatizing. It could be design templates that you're sort of trying to create. You don't necessarily need to end up spending inordinate hours trying to do the same thing with some tweaks. You could just pass a message and say create 10 different kinds of designs for 10 different
Sure.
days, for example, and
Sure.
it'll sort of create that for you and tweak it later, right? So these are some of the areas. Of course, we use some of these tools extensively. We sort of have experimented with Copilot, Claude, Anthropic, so in pockets, and we continue to sort of tinker, with various tools that keep coming. But we're also very realistic about, the amount of impact specifically in software engineering on operations, though. To your point, I think there is a significant amount of leverage that one can generate, especially automation, right? Of certain areas where there's a bunch of repetitive things that are happening today. Um, there could be machines when it comes, and then when I say operations, warehouse management, etc. I think there's a decent amount of robotics
Right.
that can be applied, image recognition in terms of quality of certain kinds of areas. So yes, so it's a powerful technology. It opens up significant areas of optimization.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I would imagine that it has its limits, so to speak, in terms of how much it can
Got
do.
it. Got it. And just the last question along these lines is, with people now also coming up with more AI capabilities as a background, or say being able to use some of these tools capabilities also become important. Want to understand from a hiring and skilling perspective, has anything changed with the advent of AI, right? Both in terms of say the kind of people you hire, the capabilities you expect them to have, but also are you using AI, for example, to screen and interview candidates? Because that's another area that we've been seeing is very popular, right? People have created environments for with adaptive difficulty, where a candidate can come do a live problem solving in the course of an interview, which of course the claim is that it's a much better way to evaluate somebody's performance and somebody's skills than say a
Mm.
more static interview, or something of that sort. So I just want to get a sense whether you're seeing these things. Has it reached that point yet where you're investing in these capabilities today, or this is still something that you see either as not very relevant or something that's farther down the line and not really a priority at the moment? That's my last closing question for the session.
No. It's definitely relevant. Although one of the chief lessons of history is that many of the things that we consider natural,
Mm-hmm.
or for that matter of fact, right, are actually man-made, right? In some sense. So there would be certain kinds of patterns that look very natural today in terms of how we do, right? But they're all processes or structure that we would have built over time, right? Similarly, when it comes to AI, yes, we're leveraging it today. When it comes to, let's say, interviews, but what we also do is we don't go with it blindly. Meaning,
Mm-hmm.
uh, again, when we are using AI internally to, let's say, generate boilerplate code in some areas, there is no reason why we should have a different set of standards for person who's giving an interview,
Right. Right.
right?
Right.
So leverage whatever tool you want, but what we also do is change context, saying, "Great, this is what you've done. Now let's modify."
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
When you're modifying, it is very important that the mental model of the engineer does not change. Then there's a problem, right?
Right. Right.
Then there is over dependence, right? Because
Hmm.
remember
Hmm.
what I said, there's only two. It's software at the end of the day, and it is able to do a certain amount of asks, right? It's not replacing the engineer in any way, right? It's complementing what the engineer can do. It's very important that the engineer understands what is getting generated, right? So that's how we sort of
Got it.
leverage it to the extent that,
Got it.
and
Got it.
it's super important because in the future, if you are not leveraging some of these tools, then you are going to end up becoming redundant, right? Or for that matter, you're going to get left behind. So it's important that you use these tools, but you absolutely cannot compromise on first principles.
I understand. Makes sense.
There
Makes
is
a
zero compromise there, right? Because we
lot.
don't have an alternate. I mean, there's no alternate to software engineers, right? I mean,
That's true.
regardless of what we want to claim.
No, no, makes a lot of sense. But look, Kaushik, thanks a lot for taking the time to do this. I think this has been
Sure.
quite eye-opening for me. It's been one of the few times that I've had a chance to really sit and speak to somebody who's been in the technology space for that long, across companies, across levels and functions, at length. So it was quite eye-opening to get a perspective of, how you think about these things, how you do things, and also some of these nuggets of wisdom and some lessons that were interspersed throughout this entire discussion. Really, really appreciate you doing this. And thank you once again.
Thanks, Rohit. Lovely chatting. I had a great time talking to you, and it was good to sort of, like I was saying, jog back memory lane. So, thank you.
So that's perfect.